It was early spring, but that morning felt colder than usual. I pulled into the parking lot of Morgan Manufacturing like I'd done thousands of times before, familiar pavement cracks underfoot, the same humming fluorescent lights greeting me as I stepped through the front door. 34 years. That's how long I'd been coming here every day, first as a bright-eyed assistant manager fresh out of school, then rising through the ranks to oversee operations. This place wasn't just my job. It was my second home, the heartbeat of my life. Morgan Manufacturing wasn't a sprawling corporate giant. No, it was a proud, family-owned company that had been passed down through 3 generations of Morgans. My grandfather founded it after the war, building everything from the ground up, and my father had carried the torch before me. I'd grown up hearing stories about those early days, about long nights on the factory floor, about handshaking deals sealed over cups of coffee and hard-earned trust. Over the decades, the company had weathered recessions, fierce competition, and changing markets. But through it all, it stayed true to its roots. A community where people knew each other by name, where loyalty meant more than just the bottom line. But times change, and so do owners. A little over 6 months ago, we sold the company to a large investment group headquartered out of New York. At first, the news felt like a distant thunderstorm, something far away that might bring rain, but maybe some fresh air too. The new owners promised innovation, investment, growth. They said they wanted to modernize operations, implement new technologies, and position us for the future. We were told there'd be changes, but nothing to worry about for those of us who'd been here since the beginning. I remember walking into my office that morning, the usual scent of oil and machine grease mingling with the aroma of fresh coffee from the break room. On my desk sat a single envelope, marked with the new company logo and my name printed on the front. It was the first time I'd seen official communication from the new director, Leonard Price, a man I'd met once at a company-wide meeting whose expression was as cold and sharp as the suits he wore. I set down my bag and picked up the envelope with a mix of curiosity and unease. My hands trembled slightly, though I tried to steady myself. Opening it, I unfolded the letter and began to read. Dear Mr. Morgan, as part of our ongoing efforts to modernize Morgan Manufacturing and ensure long-term viability in an increasingly competitive market, we are implementing necessary operational changes effective immediately. Unfortunately, these measures include a reduction in base salaries for all managerial positions. Your compensation will be decreased by 60%, effective at the start of the next pay period. We understand this is a difficult adjustment, but it is essential to streamline costs and maintain the company's financial health. Further details will be provided in upcoming departmental meetings. Thank you for your continued dedication during this transition. Sincerely, Leonard Price, Director of Operations. I sat there, stunned. The words blurred together as I reread that number, 60%. More than half my pay, gone in a blink. After 34 years. 3 decades and more of early mornings, late nights, weekends missed, sacrifices made, all of it reduced to a brutal figure on a page. My mind flashed back to all the milestones, the first big contract we landed, the lean years during the 2008 recession, the celebrations when we hit new production goals. I remembered the faces of my colleagues, some older than me, some younger, who'd shared those struggles and triumphs. We'd been a team, a family, built on trust and mutual respect. And now, we were nothing more than expenses to cut, numbers to be slashed to satisfy a boardroom in a city far removed from the smell of metal and sweat and community pride. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles, feeling a cold weight settle in my chest. The hum of the office, the phone ringing, the quiet tapping of keyboards suddenly felt hollow and distant. How do you come back from this? How do you look someone in the eye after telling them you're taking more than half their livelihood away? I thought about the people on the factory floor, the line workers who trusted me to have their backs. What message did this send? That decades of loyalty meant nothing? That their years of hard work could be dismissed with a letter? My phone buzzed with a message from Mark, one of my oldest friends and fellow managers. He'd seen the same letter. His short text said simply, "Did you get this?" "Unbelievable," I typed back, hands shaking slightly. "Yeah, 60%, after 34 years. We exchanged a few more messages, frustration and disbelief pouring out. There was talk of meeting up after work to discuss what this meant, how to respond. But I knew deep down that no amount of venting would erase the sting. I walked out to the factory floor for a quick break, hoping the familiar sounds of machines and chatter would ground me. Instead, I saw the worried faces of my team, their uncertain eyes reflecting the same anxiety I felt. The rumors had been swirling: layoffs, pay cuts, new management policies, but seeing it in black and white was something else entirely. I caught a glimpse of Jim, a machinist who'd worked here nearly as long as I had, his hands calloused but steady. He nodded at me, silent understanding passing between us. I had to hold it together, for their sake. Back in my office, I pulled out an old photo album, yellowed pictures of company picnics, retirement parties, moments frozen in time. It was a testament to everything we'd built, but now it felt like a relic of a world slipping away. I spent the rest of that day in a haze, fielding calls from concerned coworkers, drafting emails to HR seeking clarification, and trying to find some flicker of hope amid the dark news. But the truth was undeniable. The company I'd devoted my life to was no longer the same. The new director's cold business model threatened to erase decades of loyalty, community, and care. That evening, as I drove home past the familiar streets of our town, the weight of the letter pressed heavy on my mind. 34 years of dedication suddenly reduced to a simple cost-cutting line item, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning of a long, difficult road ahead. After that devastating letter, I found myself retreating to the one place that still felt like mine, my cluttered office at Morgan Manufacturing. It was small and worn, but filled with decades of memories, framed photos, awards, yellowed letters from suppliers and customers, a faded calendar marking milestones from years gone by. I sank into my chair, running my fingers over the worn leather of an old company handbook that I'd kept from my early days. For a long time, I just stared at the walls, lost in thought. 34 years. That's more than half my life dedicated to this company. Not just the work itself, but the relationships, the friendships built in lunch breaks and overtime hours, the trust earned from clients who came to rely on us not just for parts or services, but for integrity and care. I thought about my father's stories, about how he'd stood on that very factory floor with nothing but grit and determination. This company was more than a paycheck. It was a legacy, and I felt like that legacy was crumbling under the weight of a signature on a cold letterhead. Every corner of this office reminded me of moments that shaped me professionally and personally. There was a faded group photo from the company's 50th anniversary. Everyone looked so proud back then. Smiling faces, hands on shoulders, genuine camaraderie. Those faces included men and women who'd since retired, passed on, or left when the company changed hands. I pulled open a drawer to find a collection of thank you notes, handwritten letters from customers who'd been with us for decades, praising our honesty, our willingness to go the extra mile. That was what made this place special, not the machines or the contracts, but the people who believed in each other. But now, all that felt fragile, like a house of cards on the brink of collapse. The new management's announcement wasn't just about cutting costs. It felt like a slap in the face to everything I'd invested in, every sacrifice made. It was a betrayal of the trust that had taken years to build. It was as if they saw us all as replaceable, interchangeable parts rather than individuals with histories, families, and dreams. I knew I wasn't alone in feeling this way. In the hallway, whispers floated, employees speculating about who'd be next, who'd walk out the door, who could even afford to stay on with such a drastic cut. Morale was sinking fast, and the company culture we'd nurtured was quickly unraveling. I spent hours that day poring over old records, reflecting on the contracts I'd negotiated, the projects I'd overseen, the crises I'd managed. I realized how deeply intertwined my identity had become with this company. Letting go wouldn't just be a professional decision. It would mean redefining who I was. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my wife, Martha. I showed her the letter again, the cold words still fresh in my mind. She listened quietly as I shared my fears, not just for myself, but for the people who relied on this company for their livelihoods. "We've built something real here," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "And now it feels like it's being torn apart by people who don't understand what it means to us." Martha squeezed my hand and reminded me gently, You've given them your best for all these years. No matter what happens, that's something no one can take away. Her words gave me some comfort, but the weight of those decades, of all the memories, hard work, and loyalty, pressed down harder than ever. As I lay awake that night, the faces of colleagues flashed through my mind, people who'd stood by me through thick and thin, who trusted me to lead with integrity. I wondered how many of them were quietly questioning their own futures, wondering if this company was still the place they thought it was. The Morgan manufacturing I'd devoted my life to was changing, and not for the better. But the question that haunted me was this: could I find a way to protect the legacy I loved, or was it already slipping through my fingers? The days following the sudden announcement of the 60% pay cut felt like the slow, uneasy shifting of tectonic plates beneath our feet. The factory, which for 34 years had been a place of steady routine, familiar faces, and hard-earned pride, suddenly felt foreign, where once there had been laughter, casual greetings, and the hum of confident work. Now there was a tense quietness, a heaviness that weighed on everyone's shoulders. It wasn't just the shock of the pay cut itself. It was the way it made us all question everything we thought we knew about the company and our place in it. I noticed how people began moving differently. Footsteps slowed and voices lowered. Hallway conversations, once open and easy, were now quick and clipped, disappearing whenever a manager passed by. Employees who had shared decades of work together suddenly avoided eye contact, unsure what to say, or whether they should say anything at all. The cafeteria was no longer a place of warmth. Instead, it echoed with the uncomfortable shuffle of chairs and murmured exchanges behind cupped hands. The office had lost its heartbeat. The company had always been more than a place to clock in and out for me. It was a family, one I had built, nurtured, and grown with for more than 3 decades. I thought about the early days, when the factory was smaller, but the sense of community was stronger than anything I'd ever known. We knew each other's kids, celebrated milestones, and weathered storms together. The company was the fabric of our lives, and now, in a blink, it felt as though that fabric was being torn apart by a management team that saw us only as expenses to trim. One morning, after a particularly restless night, I decided I couldn't keep this bottled up. I reached out to a few of my most trusted colleagues: Mike, who'd been running maintenance for over 25 years, Linda from accounting, a sharp mind who always had a way of cutting through corporate jargon, and Sarah, who managed logistics and had a quiet strength that made her a natural leader. We met at the small cafe across the street, the one we'd often joked about owning someday. The place felt like a sanctuary from the cold indifference of the factory floor. We took a corner table, far from prying eyes and ears, and for the first time in days, I heard voices not muted by fear. Mike was the first to speak. "I don't know how they think we're supposed to live on this cut," he said, shaking his head slowly, staring into his coffee like it held all the answers. 60%? It's not just a pay cut. It's a kick in the teeth. Linda nodded, rubbing her temples. It's a slap in the face. We've been loyal for decades. I've seen layoffs, slowdowns, but this feels like the company's throwing us away. Sarah's voice was softer, but just as resolute. And what about the message this sends to the people who are just starting here, who want to build their careers? What kind of future does this company have if it treats the folks who built it like this? The conversation was raw and honest. None of us held back. We talked about mortgages, medical bills, college tuition for kids, the uncertainty looming over all of us. We shared stories about the best moments, the hardest days, the pride we took in our work. And then we talked about what we could do. What were our options? How could we push back? How could we protect ourselves and the company we loved from becoming something unrecognizable? Word spread quickly after that first meeting. Others who felt the sting of the pay cut quietly reached out, grateful to have someone to talk to. We weren't organizing a rebellion, at least not yet. But there was a sense of collective purpose growing, a shared feeling that we couldn't just accept this and move on. People confided in me during brief moments on the factory floor or in passing. "David, what do you think we should do?" Or, "Do you know if there's any way to fight this?" Some were scared, some angry, many uncertain, but almost everyone was looking for hope. Over the following days, I spent long hours in my office, returning calls, answering questions, and slowly piecing together what we might be able to do. I reached out to contacts I'd made over the years: labor advocates, old friends who understood corporate policies and workers' rights, and started gathering information. We needed to understand the legal landscape before making any moves. We needed to be prepared. I arranged more informal meetings, sometimes over coffee after shifts, sometimes in quiet corners of the break room when no one was watching. The discussions were careful, but growing more confident. We talked about the potential risks, retaliation, the possibility of losing jobs entirely, but also the cost of silence. If we didn't act, we risked losing not just paychecks, but the respect, dignity, and fairness we'd fought for all these years. One night, after a particularly heated conversation with Linda and Sarah, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the documents and notes sprawled out in front of me. I thought about the company's founding values, about the families who depended on us, and about my own family, who looked to me to lead and protect. It was clear that this wasn't just about me, it was about all of us. There was no easy answer, no quick fix. But I knew one thing for certain. We had to stand together. We had to be more than a group of worried employees. We had to become a force that management couldn't ignore. In the weeks that followed, our small circle grew. We shared ideas for petitions, drafted letters to the board, and explored avenues for legal advice. But above all, we stayed connected, reminding each other that we weren't alone in this. Our strength was in our unity, in the years of shared history and trust that no corporate memo could erase. It was during these quiet conversations, filled with hope, fear, and determination, that I found a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for my paycheck anymore. I was fighting for the soul of a company that had been my life's work, and for the people who had become more than coworkers. They were family. And while the road ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, I knew one thing. We were ready to face it, together. The days following the announcement of the 60% pay cut felt like I was walking through a thick fog, each step uncertain, every thought heavy with doubt and disappointment. I kept replaying that moment in my mind, sitting at my desk, staring blankly at the letter from the new director, feeling as if the ground beneath me had shifted. After 34 years, this was the message. This was the respect shown to loyalty and hard work. It was hard to swallow. I remembered the early days vividly. Fresh out of college, nervous but determined, I'd joined the company with dreams of making a difference, not just for myself, but for the team, the community, the small manufacturers we supported. Over the years, the company had become more than just a place to punch a clock. It was where I had built friendships, mentored young employees, celebrated milestones, and weathered storms alongside colleagues who had become like family. But now, that community felt fragile, almost shattered. The new leadership, with its cold spreadsheets and relentless focus on efficiency, didn't see the people behind the numbers. To them, I wasn't David Morgan, the loyal manager who had steered the plant through economic downturns and product launches. I was a cost to be cut. I spent many sleepless nights wrestling with what to do next. The pay cut wasn't just about money. It was about what I was willing to accept, and more importantly, what kind of message it sent to the people who had counted on me all these years. Could I still look my team in the eye if I stayed and agreed to those terms? Could I keep my pride intact? One evening, after another long day, I sat across the kitchen table from Linda. She was my rock, steady and unwavering through every challenge. I laid it all out. The shock, the frustration, the growing sense of betrayal. She listened without interruption, her eyes steady, reflecting the same mixture of sadness and resolve I felt. Then she said something simple but powerful. "David, you gave this company your best for 34 years. You've been their backbone. But sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even if that means walking away. Don't let them decide your worth." Her words hit home. For so long, I had measured my value by the company's terms. But now, it was clear. I needed to measure my own worth. The decision to resign didn't come lightly. I thought about the security of my paycheck, the routine of familiar faces, and the comfort of a known path. But I also thought about dignity, respect, and what it meant to honor a lifetime of work. I spent days drafting my resignation letter, carefully choosing words that conveyed gratitude without sugarcoating the reality. I thanked the company for the opportunities and friendships, but I also made it clear that I could not continue under conditions that devalued the people who made the company thrive. Packing up my office was an emotional journey, Each photo, each award, each note of appreciation was a reminder of years gone by, of challenges overcome and successes shared. I handled each memento with care, feeling the bittersweet blend of nostalgia and hope. And even as I cleared my desk, my mind was already racing ahead. The idea of starting a consulting firm had been simmering quietly for months, but now it became a beacon of possibility. I knew I could help other small manufacturers grow sustainably and ethically, without sacrificing the human touch the corporate giants seemed to overlook. It wasn't an easy leap. There was uncertainty, financial risk, and a mountain of logistics to figure out. But the thought of building something on my own terms, guided by values, respect, and community, gave me strength. That night, I went to bed with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. Leaving behind 34 years of loyalty was painful, but holding on to a role that demanded I sacrifice my principles felt unbearable. I was ready for a new chapter, not just to survive, but to thrive, and to prove that respect, integrity, and community could still be the foundation of a successful business. The road ahead was unknown, but for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. The final weeks at the company felt less like a farewell and more like a battlefield. After submitting my resignation, I expected some relief, maybe even a sense of closure. Instead, I found myself navigating a maze of corporate red tape, mounting pressures, and ethical conflicts that tested not only my professional resolve, but my very principles. The new director, Michael Sanders, had a reputation for being uncompromising. He wasn't interested in the history or culture that had nurtured this company for decades. His focus was on efficiency, cost-cutting, and above all, profit margins. I quickly learned that my role during these last days was not to advocate for the team or uphold quality standards, but to enforce policies that often felt cold and disconnected from the realities on the shop floor. One of the most troubling directives was the mandate to reduce safety checks on machinery. According to Michael, these inspections were excessive and slowing production. I voiced my concerns quietly but firmly, reminding him that worker safety was not just a box to tick, it was a responsibility that protected lives. His response was curt and dismissive. "We have metrics to meet, David. Safety is important, but so is keeping the plant running and the books balanced." It was a chilling reminder of how quickly human factors became secondary when profit was king. At the same time, I was pressured to implement a new performance monitoring system that tracked every employee's output with ruthless precision. It left little room for teamwork or mentorship, values I had always championed. I knew that this kind of surveillance would create stress, break down trust, and erode the culture we had built over decades. The tension in the office grew palpable. Employees whispered about layoffs, worried about the future, morale plummeted. I tried to be a calming presence, but even I struggled to keep the hope alive in those final days. One afternoon, Michael called me into a meeting with the HR director and finance officer. They laid out plans to cut benefits and reduce overtime pay, citing the need to streamline expenses. I pointed out that many employees relied on overtime to make ends meet, and that cutting benefits would cause further hardship. My objections were noted, but ultimately ignored. The most difficult moments came when I was asked to communicate these harsh policies directly to the team. Standing in front of faces I'd known for years, I felt a profound sense of conflict. I wasn't delivering news as a leader looking out for their welfare. I was a messenger for a system that no longer seemed to care. Behind the scenes, I worked to document everything: policy changes, employee concerns, safety issues, knowing this record might be important for any future legal or ethical review. Despite the mounting pressure, I remained committed to leaving on my own terms. I made it clear to Michael that while I respected the company's right to run its business, I could not compromise my own standards or the dignity of the workers during my remaining time. There were moments of confrontation, tense exchanges where I stood my ground against demands that conflicted with what I believed was right. Sometimes I felt isolated, as if the old guard was being pushed aside for a new era I did not want to be part of. But in those moments, I also found clarity. The very issues I was grappling with underscored why I had made the decision to leave and start something new. I wanted to build a business where people mattered more than just numbers, where integrity was not sacrificed for short-term gains. Leaving meant stepping away from the corporate machine and reclaiming my values. As my last day drew nearer, I felt a bittersweet mix of exhaustion and anticipation. The struggle to maintain ethical standards in an increasingly ruthless environment had taken its toll, but I was ready to turn the page. I packed up my office one final time, taking with me the lessons learned, the friendships forged, and a renewed commitment to creating a better way forward, not just for me, but for all those who believed in the dignity of honest work. The morning I finally handed in my resignation was a moment I'd been wrestling with for weeks, if not months. It was the culmination of sleepless nights, countless conversations with family and friends, and a growing realization that the company I'd devoted 34 years of my life to was no longer the place I believed it to be. Walking into the HR office felt surreal. Every step down the hall echoed memories, celebrations, tough deadlines, quiet victories, and hard-earned friendships. This wasn't just a building, it was home for so long. Michael Sanders, the new director, sat behind the polished desk alongside the HR manager, a woman whose expression was polite but guarded. Between us lay the non-compete agreement, a document that seemed more like a legal noose than a simple formality. It was their way of telling me, if you walk away, don't expect to work anywhere near here. The clause was extreme, aiming to silence me and block me from leveraging decades of experience and relationships I'd painstakingly built. But I was no stranger to hard bargains, and I wasn't about to let them fence me in. Calmly, I reminded them that my original employment contract, signed decades ago, contained no such restrictions. I'd brought copies with me and had my lawyer on speed dial throughout this process. Under state law, especially given my role and the nature of our industry, such restrictive covenants were difficult to enforce, especially when they could potentially harm local businesses and customers. For a moment, the atmosphere thickened with tension. I could see them exchanging glances, calculating their next move. Then, perhaps recognizing they couldn't strong-arm me without risking legal repercussions or public relations damage, they softened their stance. The compromise they offered was straightforward. I would not actively solicit any of the company's current clients for 30 days following my departure. In return, they would relinquish any further claim to restrict where or when I could work afterward. It wasn't ideal, far from it, but it was a workable middle ground. I agreed without hesitation. When word of my resignation spread through the corridors, I was met with a mix of reactions. Some colleagues expressed quiet admiration, grateful someone had the courage to stand up against what felt like an unjust corporate takeover. Others were more reserved, their eyes clouded with worry about their own futures in a company now reshaped by cold, bottom-line decisions. I knew many of them felt trapped, too many years invested to walk away, yet uneasy about what lay ahead. Packing up my desk was an emotional task. Every photo, every scrap of paper, every coffee mug told a story. My desk had been my command post for decades, a place where challenges were met head-on and successes quietly celebrated. I carefully organized all my files, prepared detailed handover notes, and made sure the transition would be as smooth as possible despite the circumstances. Longtime coworkers stopped by throughout the day. Some shook my hand firmly, others embraced me in silent support. Their faces reflected the bittersweet mix of respect, loss, and hope. I promised to keep in touch with as many as possible. Even though I was leaving, I wasn't disappearing. The moment I walked out the door for the final time, a flood of emotions crashed over me. The familiar creak of the heavy door closing behind me echoed in my ears, a sound that symbolized the end of an era. Yet beneath the sadness, there was a simmering sense of liberation. I was stepping away not just from a paycheck or a position, but from a system that no longer honored loyalty, hard work, or the community it once served. As I got into my car and started the engine, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with risks and unknowns, but it was mine to navigate. I wasn't running away. I was choosing to build something better. That evening, I shared the news with my family around the kitchen table. Their support was unwavering, a balm to the wounds of this difficult transition. My wife's steady encouragement reminded me why this choice mattered, not just for me, but for all of us. My children, though young, sensed the gravity of the moment and offered smiles that gave me strength. Together, we talked about the future, about my plans to start a small consulting firm dedicated to helping local manufacturers thrive through ethical, sustainable practices. It was a new path, one that would allow me to carry forward the values I held dear: respect for workers, integrity in business, and community-centered growth. Leaving the company wasn't just a professional decision, it was a deeply personal one. It meant saying goodbye to a chapter that had defined much of my identity, but it also meant reclaiming my dignity and my voice. The corporate giant that had tried to diminish me with a brutal pay cut and legal threats had underestimated one thing: the strength of a man who knows his worth. That night, as I lay awake planning the next steps, I felt a quiet but profound certainty. This was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of something new, something better. And I was ready. Starting my own consulting firm after 34 years felt daunting, but necessary. With a modest office and a small team of trusted former colleagues, I focused on helping local manufacturers improve their operations ethically and sustainably. Early on, clients were hesitant, but soon saw the value in our personalized, honest approach. Word spread through referrals, and our reputation grew steadily. We weren't just offering business advice. We were rebuilding trust in a community shaken by corporate decisions. Speaking at a regional conference was a proud moment, where I shared our story of loyalty and integrity. Though my former employer tried to undermine us, I stayed focused on the future. The stress of the past faded, replaced by renewed purpose and support from family and friends. Morgan Manufacturing Consulting became more than a business. It became a symbol that standing up for your values can lead to real, lasting success.